Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar, Reaching a New Market with Farm to School. This webinar is especially designed for Nebraska's farmers and ranchers. Farm to School opens up a market for food producers that can be consistent, reliable, and fun. To do it well, though, it's important to have some background on school lunches, breakfasts, and snacks. Because schools are funded with federal funds, their purchases have a few rules and regulations to adhere to. This webinar will address what schools are looking for and what Nebraska farmers and ranchers can do to expand into this market. My name is Sandra Renner, and I am a program specialist with the Center for Rural Affairs based out of Lyons, Nebraska. Joining me today is Sarah Smith, Farm to School Lead in Nebraska with the Center for Rural Affairs and the organizer of this series of webinars. We'll share information on one more upcoming webinar for farmers at the end of this presentation, as well as a link for an archived webinar for food service staff that went live last week. You can find more information on upcoming and archived webinars at our website, cfra.org/F2S as in Farm to School. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel with the Center for Rural Affairs. After the webinar, we'll share the link with you as well as links for presenter PowerPoints and any additional resources. Before we get started, please keep in mind that should your audio be unclear, you are able to switch from your computer mic or speaker to phone in, and you can locate the audio panel within your webinar control panel. Select the telephone button and the directions will appear. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the control panel on your screen. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar by typing your questions into the question box at the bottom of your control panel. We will have time at the end of the webinar for presenters to answer these questions. Okay, now that the housekeeping is out of the way, we are ready to begin our presentation. First up, we'll hear from Sarah with a general but exciting overview of Farm to School in Nebraska. We'll then hear from Donna Handley, Program Specialist with the Nebraska Department of Education Nutrition Services. Donna is a registered dietitian who works one-on-one with school district food service staff and knows the ins and outs for purchasing and nutrition requirements at the pre-K through 12 level. She is the Department of Ed Nutrition Services contact for Farm to School. Next, as an extension educator with the University of Nebraska-Lincoln for 17 years, Sarah Browning's programming has focused on environmental horticulture, fruit and vegetable production, and food safety. Working with the general public and commercial green industry professionals, her major program goals include conserving water, protecting water quality, promoting local food production, and protecting human health. And last, we'll hear from Ryan Pekarek of Pekarek's Produce in Dwight, Nebraska. Ryan and his wife, Katie, own Pekarek's Produce, and Ryan will share some specifics about their farm, what they grow, and who they market their produce to. Ryan's experience with schools ranges from selling to his local district at East Butler Public Schools with 300 students to bidding his product to Omaha Public Schools, which serves 40,000 students. We're so glad to have so much experience with us today on this webinar. All right, without further ado, take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Sandra. Sorry for the delay there, guys. Thanks for joining today, everyone. It's a real privilege to have this wealth of food system experience on the line with us today, sharing their expertise. There's no better time for us to be knee-deep in this series of webinars than right now in October while it's Farm to School Month. Back in September, Governor Ricketts signed a proclamation for us declaring that October was Farm to School Month in Nebraska. And it's also National Farm to School Month, and states across the entire country are celebrating this month. For example, on October 22nd at noon local time, there were hundreds of schools and thousands of students that participated in something called an apple crunch, which is an event where you have all the students or anyone in the school that take a bite out of a local apple at the very same moment. And so you can almost hear that crunch across all of rural Nebraska. Other schools participated in the Midwest menu that was on October 22nd as well. And that highlighted a local veggie, a local meat product, a fruit, and a local grain whenever feasible. They would highlight as many items on the menu as possible. So we find that Farm to School Month is a fantastic opportunity to test the waters for selling these local foods to school. And you'll see in this picture from the proclamation that we had a very full representation of key people on board with us that represent Farm to School and healthy programs. So pictured here, we have a school administrator, an ag educator, a student, farmer, rancher, Nebraska Department of Education, and a school food service director. So Farm to School really does include everyone, and again, Farm to School Month is a great time to get involved. On October 13th, Congressman Fortenberry visited Norris Public Schools in Firth to celebrate their Farm to School efforts. As our Nebraska representative, Congressman Fortenberry is actually co-leading efforts at the national level in Congress to pass the Farm to School Act within the Child Nutrition Act reauthorization. That stands, CNR is what that stands for if you hear that acronym. And what that is it strengthens Farm to School across the country in multiple ways. But the deadline for Congress to reauthorize CNR is actually now. The previous CNR, known as the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010, expired on September 30th, so it's a little overdue. And they need to be passing the new version of this bill that includes Farm to School resources. And we want to make sure that legislators know that Farm to School is a common sense approach to child nutrition that empowers kids and their families to make informed food choices while strengthening the local economy and contributing to vibrant communities. So for those of you on this webinar, if you're interested in making your voice heard, you can head over to our website, which is again cfra.org/F2S, and sign on to endorse the Farm to School Act. You'll see an orange bar there. You can click on that, and it says endorse the Farm to School Act of 2015. Then we also always encourage you to share your stories by posting photos. It could be of your farm, your trucks in the field, your fields, any farmers out in the field, or school lunches that you might be at, and share those on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, social media feeds. And you can use the hashtags that you see here on the screen. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on. And also, just last week, we learned that USDA has early results back from their second Farm to School census. We found, or they found, USDA found that these results brought in $598 million of local food during the 2013-2014 school year. And those numbers represent a 55% increase from $212 million to $598 over final results from the last census that was conducted 2 years prior. And those preliminary numbers show that thanks to the hard work and dedication of the school food service directors, teachers, farmers, ranchers, there are more than 42,000 schools involved in Farm to School activities. So whether this is through buying local foods, building school gardens, or taking a field trip to a local farm, these programs are improving child nutrition and provide dynamic educational experiences for students while providing new market opportunities for local and regional farmers. So just for your information, 56% of Nebraska schools responded to this census, and USDA is accepting submissions of new data. So we're encouraging districts to correct any records they might have submitted, or if they haven't submitted yet, to go through that process by November 20th. So if you're at your schools, you might want to encourage them to do this as well, so that we can get as accurate numbers for Nebraska as possible. So the Farm to School Census provides us with really incredible information on how and where Farm to School is working, but also where efforts could be improved. We're already seeing from the numbers that there's great value in Farm to School. So for instance, we see reduced plate waste, improved acceptance of healthier school meals, increased participation in school meal programs, lower school meal program costs, and increased support from parents and community members for these healthier school meals. And one way that we like to celebrate and promote benefits is on social media, like I mentioned a few minutes ago. And so these hashtags that you see are some ways that if you do social media, you can engage in this way. And we'll share at the end of the presentation our different links for Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. But we do encourage students to take a picture of any colorful and local school lunch food that they eat and to share using the hashtag #ThanksLunchLady. Anyone involved in farm-to-school efforts across the board, though, are encouraged to share stories with us and use these hashtags. So just to be clear, what exactly is farm-to-school? The National Farm-to-School Network states that farm-to-school enriches the connection communities have with fresh, healthy food and local food producers by changing food purchasing and education practices at schools and preschools. So it's basically done in one of these three ways that you see. Procurement, which is local foods are purchased, promoted, and served in the cafeteria as a snack or a taste test. Education, students participate in educational activities related to agriculture, food, health, or nutrition. And third, school gardens. Students are engaging in hands-on learning. So as a grower or food producer, you really could take on a hands-on approach with any of these three target areas. Whether you're selling your food to schools, or joining a classroom to talk about your business and growing practices, or working as a mentor for the school garden, you can get involved at any level. Farm to school is across the plate. It's, produce is a great piece to have on salad bars. We see farm to school enter with raw veggies in that way, and kids load their plates up with those vegetables. But also, all of these other components are great ways to offer local foods: meat, poultry, eggs, fruit, dairy, vegetables, beans, grains, and flours. And when we define local, there really is no standard definition of local. It is up to the district. So whether that's within a radius from your school, or you classify it as a county, or perhaps you want to say it's within the state of Nebraska, or you want to say it's within 250 miles, or in a region of the Midwest region, you're able to define that at the school or the district level. And it's also changeable depending on season or a product, or if you have a special event. So there's no rules or regulations on what that means. Farm to school is awesome for the kids. It's really good for the district, but it's also really beneficial for farmers. So some of the benefits we have listed out here. So adding a school as a new market for your product can provide new income for the farm. The school market may be a new way to sell your surplus vegetables like tomatoes at the end of the season, and build a strong partnership to grow more acres of a new crop, maybe that you haven't tried, and to sell that on contract to a school. Second, schools demand a high-quality product, but that doesn't mean that it has to be perfect cosmetically. Not at all. Schools might have the ability to minimally process products on site and even pay for these misshapen or grade B products. Three, adding a new market helps to manage risk because it gives you increased numbers of avenues for selling your products. Four, we have an example of increasing on-farm opportunities here that perhaps you wanted to develop a relationship with selling a certain product like winter squash to school. The kids then become an audience that have an increased reason to want to visit your farm. Fifth, farm to school is free advertising. When you sell your products to schools, you're engaging in educational opportunities with schools. You're creating awareness of your farm. And this especially is valuable to farmers who operate at CSAs or sell at farmers markets. The students get excited about these farmers, and they can take that message home to their families. Six, sales to schools help to educate current and future generations about healthy food choices and the importance of local food. And lastly, just a tidbit here that if you partner with schools, there could be relationships created here that bring about volunteers who might be able to come to your farm to glean products for their school or for food pantries. When we work with food service managers at the school level and talk to them about sourcing food, these are some of the ways that we encourage them to do that. We do encourage them to reach out to farmers directly, but they're often not sure how to find you. So, considering that the average food service director wears a lot of different hats, they're menu planning, they're cooking, serving, managing staff, cleaning, and more than that even, we often hear that what they hope for is for food producers to directly approach them. And Donna can talk to us a little bit more about that in a little bit. But these are some ways that we encourage them to look for local products. And one spot that we try to make it easier for food service staff to find farmers is on a tool we've created called Find a Nebraska Farmer, and that's on our website. We add farmers to this map as we know they're interested and willing. So if it's specific to farm to school, you can find them on this map. If you're interested and not currently on this map, you can connect with me and we can add you. We just like to have a general description of what you have to offer, your contact information, and a website, so we can include that so people can find even more information if you have it available. Also, UNL Fresh Buy Local creates a directory. That's a good place to include your information. Department of Ag has a huge listing of producers in the state of Nebraska. And lastly, local food hubs like Lone Tree Foods and Nebraska Food Cooperative, they work hard to bridge the gap between farmers and schools. And so they're currently, both organizations are selling to Nebraska schools and also in some cases outside of the borders of Nebraska. Additional resources, there's lots of places to go. Stay in touch with us at the Center for Rural Affairs on our website and sign up for our monthly Farm to School newsletter. And there is where we share success stories across the state, possible funding opportunities, profiles for schools who are active in Farm to School and for farmers. We also list upcoming webinars and conferences there. USDA Farm to School and the National Farm to School Network have a lot of resources as well. Here in Nebraska, we work specifically with Casey Foster in the Ag Promotion Department at the Department of Ag, and he's got lots of good resources. And lastly, other organizations in the state that have taken a very supportive role of Farm to School include the Midwest Dairy Association, the Nebraska Sustainable Agriculture Society, Nebraska Farmers Union, the Farm Bureau, Nebraska Beef Council, and the Cattlemen's Association. So if you need additional contact information for any of those businesses or organizations, let me know and I can pass that along. Okay, that wraps it up for me. Sandra, I'll let you take it from here.
Thanks, Sarah. Next up, let's hear from Donna Handley from the Nebraska Department of Education and Nutrition Services. Whenever you're ready, Donna.
Okay. Hello. Thank you, Sarah and Sandra, and hello, everyone. You can hear me okay, right? Okay. Okay, thank you. Basically, I'm going to be talking today about selling directly to schools and some tips for farmers. And as Sandra said earlier, I work one-on-one with schools, but I'm not actually in the school working with the farmer in this program. So to get the information for today's webinar, I went to the experts, the actual school food service directors in Nebraska, those who are working with farm-to-school programs, working directly with farmers, and so this is the information I'm going to be sharing with you today. And I know that Sarah talked a little bit about the census. I would like to share with you some of the latest census statistics that we have that come from the 2011-12 school year, from the Farm to School Census from the USDA Food and Nutrition Service. So this first slide shows us that how many districts and schools were participating in the Farm to School program during that school year. There are approximately 249 public school districts in Nebraska. 201 of those completed the census, and that left us with 49 districts, and that represent approximately 338 individual schools with an estimated 139,448 children enrolled in those schools. So when the schools were asked, are you participating in farm-to-school activities, 24%, as we can see here, said yes, and then 14% said they plan to start in the future. And if we'd add those two together, I like to look at this as 38% that are or will hopefully be soon participating in the farm-to-school program. So it's growing, actually. And then we have the 53% saying no, 9% don't really know yet. Next, let's look a little bit at how money is spent in Nebraska. And overall, in 2011-12, school districts spent over $36 million on food. Almost $4 million of that was directed toward buying locally produced food, and which is about 10% of that number. The good news is that 39% of the districts that did buy local food say that they will buy more local foods in the future. So that's good news. So, you know, I think this is very interesting to see what kinds of local produce schools are buying. And of course, fruit and vegetables are number one. Fruit and vegetables tied there with 82% of the schools saying these are the things we're purchasing. Meat or poultry at 27%, along with fluid milk, 27%, and then dairy products other than milk, 23%. And we're told we can look for growth in the areas of meat and poultry, and I know for a fact we're receiving more calls here in the office about people asking questions about how to procure local meat, and farmers also asking how can I hook up with the school to sell local meat. So that area is definitely going to grow. Also growth in baked goods, herbs, dairy products other than milk, and plant-based proteins. So these are the top five, I guess you would call them. Cucumbers coming in at number one, and I can attest to this and look at visiting schools over the last year and a half. I've seen a lot of local cucumbers and a lot of kids chowing down on local cucumbers. Watermelon also. This fall saw a lot of local watermelon. I just visited a school last week, and we're seeing the apples now in this time of year, and then cantaloupe number 4 and milk. And in addition to these top five, we also see that we also know that in Nebraska, peppers, beef, honey, and onions are also popular food items. So let's start now with the tips for farmers on how to begin. And initiating contact is, you know, a very important part of this process, getting everything started. And farmers should know that they shouldn't be afraid to initiate contact. Contacting the school administration or the food service manager to initiate the conversation. And in a lot of these small school districts, it's very likely that a farmer will know one of these individuals and can strike up a casual conversation and talk more about it. And one of the things that I think is a good practice to follow is developing a marketing packet that includes information about your farm, because not only will you have this packet during your discussion with the food service person, but also you can leave that packet with them and they can refer to it in the future, or maybe think about it, go back and look at some of the information. So it's recommended that this packet include some of the following: what you grow or raise, which of course that would be important, and basically talking with the school to identify products that they could use that you would be willing to raise. So are you willing to plant vegetables that you're not planting now just for the purpose of selling these to the schools? Also, when the products will be available and at what quantities. School food service personnel are planners. They like to know ahead of time what they can get, how much they can get, and that is also very helpful. And also in that marketing packet, it's important that you include your production practices. Maybe it's important to the school if you're certified organic, maybe it isn't, but if you have that information up front for them, that's very helpful. Are your products pesticide-free, etc., other things that you may add here. And then safety, we all know that food safety is huge. It's a huge topic, and when we're feeding our kids, we want to make sure their food is safe. So your hygiene practices, your safety practices on the farm are all important things to list in this packet. Also, you know, are you willing to invite the school food service staff to your farm to see your production and safety practices? Because this can build a relationship with trust between the two. Also, another thing is, are you willing to have field trips to your farm? That's a great way for kids to make the connection between what they're eating and where it comes from. So these are things to keep in mind, and activities that would be very useful for the school. It's also recommended to start small. Begin by contracting maybe just 1 or 2 items. I don't know, I tend to myself jump into too quickly sometimes, so you know, taking your time, checking it out, testing the water, so to speak, by maybe contracting 1 or 2 items you know you can produce the following year. So again, as I said, schools are typically planners. They may have planned ahead and will know next year's menus, so maybe you can have a conversation with them to determine what they can use next year and how much they can use, and then you can plan to plant the produce they can use, so you have that type of relationship. There are some food service managers who may not know what their menus are for the next year. I spoke with one food service manager last week, and she works for a food service management company. She says that, you know, she doesn't write the menu, so she doesn't know what she's going to be serving the next year. So that's a case where that wouldn't necessarily work. But you also have to keep in mind that schools have limited resources. Of course, they only have so much money to spend, but you also have to think of yourself too and know the price you need to make a reasonable profit. It has to work on both ends of the equation here. So in addition to knowing the price you need, it would also be helpful to know the competitors' prices. Are you going to be able to compete with some of the other sources of produce that the school might have an option to buy from? And also, again, with the schools and their limited resources, it's not only the price they pay for the produce, but also the cost of cleaning and trimming and preparing the produce for service, which I was told by one manager last week that that's a huge issue in terms of the type of produce and how long it takes them to prepare it. So, you know, I heard this a lot, and I think it's with any situation, it's very important to keep the lines of communication open. On the farmer side, keep the schools informed, be proactive, don't wait for them to contact you. If you have some information for them, be sure that you do contact them as soon as you can. Be able to commit to what you're selling, and you know, these small schools in particular, they may only get a delivery truck once a week. So if you have promised them a certain amount of produce and they're depending on that produce and something happens, they don't get it, they either have to supplement, they have to substitute something else, and they have to figure out how they're going to cover that loss. So realizing that they don't have the ability to obtain the product at the last minute is important. And also, if you know you won't be able to provide it or provide as much as you originally thought, letting them know as soon as possible is also a very good practice. A lot of the larger schools, they can make up for this because they can get a delivery truck every day, but the smaller schools, again, maybe once a week, and they just don't have the opportunity to work that way. So again, communication is key to meet the expectations of the school, and also the school needs to communicate with you too. So again, a two-way street here. Communication is also very important when discussing how and when orders will be placed and when deliveries will be made. And we'll talk about deliveries in a little bit more. But I think we all know that email has its limitations as a form of communication. It may not be the best method of communication. So if a face-to-face meeting can't be held, picking up the phone and communicating in that way is really a good practice. This is probably one of the most interesting parts of the presentation for me, because who would think about the packaging process? But this is where I was told that farmers and schools don't always speak the same language. And the example I was given was a farmer wanting to sell a bushel of apples versus the food service director's thought of, I need 40 pounds of 125, 138 count apples. Two totally different things. So the farmers may realize that they have to, they may need to sell in a different unit than they are used to. And, you know, it's just a learning process. Going through this is a learning process. Also, the containers how the produce is packed, what it's packed in, are the containers easy to handle and work with. A food service director got, I think she received green beans a couple of weeks ago, and she said that they were in waxed produce boxes with handles, very easy to carry, not too heavy. So all of these things are things to consider. Also, something like berries. Does the food service director prefer they come in clamshells, in a flat? And if that's not possible, then working out a compromise. You know, all of these things, again, take communication. And continuing with this packaging, another example is translating heads of broccoli into pounds of cleaned and cut produce. Food service managers are typically used to getting broccoli that's already cleaned and cut and ready for service in certain pounds packages. And so, you know, when you come in with heads of broccoli, it's you know, translating that into the amount that they actually need takes some doing. Also, the cleanliness of the product is important. Delivery again, confirming delivery hours, best to deliver during a less busy time. And even though you would think that the busiest times might be breakfast and lunch, you'll also have to find out if the food service is involved in any other events. Sometimes they're involved in catering events, so 2 p.m. in the afternoon may not be the best time, even though it's not exactly at lunchtime. And flexibility is key. So I would like to end with this last slide on quality, and this was just, it was wonderful to hear, because quality, usually not an issue. Usually the products are good quality, because as I was told by one food service director, farmers take pride in what they're doing, so the produce is beautiful, and I think that basically says it all. Okay, so I think that's the end of my section.
Donna, thanks so much. Wonderful information and great to have the perspective of the Nebraska Department of Ed Nutrition Services. Next up is Sarah Browning from University of Nebraska Extension. Sarah, whenever you are ready.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so we're going to be talking a little bit about food safety in regards to selling to produce to schools. And there are certainly a lot of considerations. Of course, the newer guidelines with food safety stem back to President Obama's signing of the Food Safety Modernization Act back in January of 2011. We've been waiting since that time for the final produce rule to be unveiled or to be released to us. And that's supposed to happen next month. So we're waiting probably just a few more weeks to find out what the final rules will be, and then that'll make it easier for us as we move forward, and it'll make it easier for growers because they'll know exactly what the guidelines are they need to follow related to food safety on the farm. So just to give you a little bit of information from what's currently in the FSMA produce rule, right now they have farm sizes broken out into basically 3 different sizes, and they're giving farmers, growers, a certain time frame in which to start to implement the guidelines of the produce rule. So for very small farms, and they classify a small farm as one that has less than, or excuse me, greater than $25,000 in produce sales, but no more than $250,000, those farms would have 4 years to implement the guidelines of the produce rule. What they classify as small farms would have 3 years, and small farms are those growers with greater than $250,000 in produce sales, but no more than $500,000 in produce sales. And then all farms larger than that would have 2 years to implement the guidelines of the produce rule. Now there are some exceptions for water quality standards because As the produce rule was being developed over the last few years, farmers had several periods of time when they could comment on what was being developed. One of their biggest concerns was being able to comply with the water quality standards that were required by the produce rule. And so because of that, growers will have extra time to be able to implement the guidelines in the produce rule related to water quality, water testing, and those types of issues. So there'll be an additional 2 years beyond the years that I've given you here already to become into compliance with the produce rule. Okay. Now, so what if you have less than $250,000 in sales? Well, then technically you're exempt from the produce rule, which means you won't have to follow the exact guidelines laid out for things like water testing, manure usage, and such. But it's always good to keep in mind that what is written in the produce rule are good basic practices. And so even if you are a smaller grower and you're not technically required to follow these rules, it's still a good idea to keep them in mind and probably implement as many of them as you can. But if you're under what FSMA classifies as a very small grower, that would mean you have produce sales less than $250,000 sold during the previous 3-year period, or an average of sales less than $500,000 over the last 3-year period. Okay. So there will be some growers that will be exempt from the produce rule. The guidelines in the produce rule are, a lot of them stem back to this document, the Guide to Minimize Microbial Food Safety Hazards for Fresh Fruits and Vegetables. And this document is available online. If you were just to Google the title, you would be able to pull it right up and you could download it and read through the document. Reading through this document, as well as being very familiar with the guidelines in the Food Safety Modernization Act produce rule, would be a great place to start to get yourself up to speed on food safety guidelines and getting practices on your farm in line with what is currently recommended. When we talk about food safety with produce growers, we often talk about the term GAPS. And GAPS stands for Good Agricultural Practices related to food safety. And the primary purpose of good agricultural practices, or GAPS, is to prevent contamination occurring during any phase of the growing of your produce or your fruit. It's much easier to prevent contamination than it is to try to eliminate contamination if it has occurred at some point during the production of your crops. So what are the things that we're worried about with food safety? Well, we talk mostly about disease organisms like viruses, bacteria, parasites. But we are also concerned about chemicals, things like pesticides, fertilizers, sanitizers that may not be completely washed off during the post-harvest handling process. Then we're also worried about physical objects, things like broken glass or hair or debris, things like that that may be on your produce as well. So all of these are things that we want to be very concerned about when we're thinking about food safety. Okay. So for growers, good agricultural practices, we can kind of break it down into these 8 areas. Assessing farm risks, and this area discusses, well, what is the history of the land? If the land was used for a feedlot at some point in the past, that would be a concern because there might be more bacteria or other pathogens in the soil that you would need to be aware of and you would need to manage. What is the lay of the land? Is there a potential that you could get runoff coming from a livestock area onto your produce fields that could possibly contaminate the produce? What is your water source? Where are you getting water from to irrigate your produce? So there are a lot of considerations in that whole area of assessing farm risk. We also need to think a lot about human health and hygiene because many of the pathogens that we're most concerned about, things like Salmonella and E. coli, are fecal pathogens, which means if someone uses the restroom and then doesn't wash their hands well enough before they go back to handling produce, they can very easily spread the produce or contaminate the produce with some type of pathogen. So we have to talk about things like worker health and hygiene, training workers. Why is it important that they wash their hands after they use the restroom? Why is it important that they not go to the restroom in the field? Maybe you want to consider having your workers wear disposable gloves during the post-harvest handling process to try to keep things extra clean. There's lots of considerations here, and you need to develop a plan for your farm on how you're going to educate your workers on the need for health and hygiene issues and how are you going to implement them. Water quality and use is also a big issue, and in the area of manure management as well. And I'm going to talk about those a little more in some upcoming slides, so I won't say too much about those right now. Field sanitation, cleaning your harvest buckets, your harvest knives, all of those types of things. Cleaning the truck. Maybe you have a truck that you take out into the field to harvest your produce in. If that truck was used to maybe take chickens to a processor or something, you definitely want to make sure that that truck is cleaned before you put fresh produce into it again. So there are a lot of considerations related also to field sanitation, and that also goes along with post-harvest sanitation and handling as well. Things like wildlife management. We grow vegetables outside, so there's going to be wildlife out there. And it's not a case where you want to make sure that there's never any wildlife in your fields, because that's just not realistic. But if you have an area of your fields where there's considerable wildlife traffic, where you can see that deer are going back and forth through this area of the field a lot, you can see droppings where deer have moved through the field, then those are things that you need to consider, and you need to maybe decide how you're going to manage those areas where there may be more wildlife activity. Keeping just family pets and dogs out of the field is also a good idea. I mean, dogs can help chase away deer, but dogs can also poop in the field, and their poop can be a source of fecal pathogens too, so there can be a toss-up there. And as you develop a farm food safety plan and you try to implement some strategies to make sure that you're keeping the food on your farm safe, you need to document that. How are you, for example, are you checking the temperature in your cooler area on a regular basis? How are you doing that? Do you have a thermometer posted in the cooler? If you're a small grower and you just have maybe some portable coolers that you put produce in, how are you managing the temperature in those portable coolers? So documenting these things and then being able to show that you've developed a farm food safety plan and you're working your plan is an important step in being successful with GAPS and with food safety. Okay. So I said earlier I wanted to talk a little bit more about water testing, because this was an area where farmers had a lot of concerns about how often they were going to be required to test water and whether or not they would be able to implement that. So right now the FSMA produce rule has standards for water that is tested, and I've listed those for you here. So less than 126 colony-forming units of generic E. coli per 100 mils of water is the basic guideline. So if you have water that and you are meeting this guideline, you're within the guidelines of the standard, then you're good. If, however, the water that you're using is above this, so maybe you have higher levels of E. coli in the water than what is the current standard, that doesn't mean that you can't use the water, but it means you need to understand that possibly there are some contaminants in the water, and you need to keep that in mind when you decide how it's going to be used. Now, municipal water is probably the safest source of water because it's so highly regulated and treated for human use. Groundwater, or a well, is probably the next safest source of water. And in the FSMA produce rule right now, untreated groundwater, the recommendation is that it's tested 4 times per year or growing season, with a minimum of 4 samples as close as possible to harvest. Now, surface water is probably the most risky, and I should say it really is the most risky type of water, because there's all sorts of contaminants that can get into surface water. So the water testing guidelines for surface water are higher than they are for untreated groundwater or well water. So right now, the way the produce rule is written, they want people who irrigate with surface water to develop a baseline of their water quality. And they're going to do that baseline over a 2-year period using a minimum of 20 water samples. And then after that, you want to continue to verify your water quality every year with a minimum of 5 water tests during the growing season. Okay? So that's what's currently written into the rule right now. So what if a grower is using a lake or a creek as their irrigation water source, and their water does not meet the microbial standard for FSMA produce rule? Well, there are some ways that can be managed. The grower can use an interval of days from the last irrigation to harvest, allowing for microbial die-off rate. Okay, and FSMA will have some guidance documents, some fact sheets that they will be developing to help growers understand more easily what would be an appropriate number of days from the last irrigation to harvest that would allow for a good microbial die-off rate. Okay, so that would be one thing that you could do. A grower could also use an interval of days from harvest to the end of storage. So maybe you weren't going to take that produce to a school right away. Maybe it was potatoes that you harvested, and you know you're going to be storing them for a while before they go to the school. So you could use an interval of days, again, from harvest to storage that would allow for microbial die-off. Another strategy, a grower could use water in a way that does not result in direct contact with the produce. So, for example, if you're growing lettuce that you're providing to the school, and your water does not meet the microbial standard, then in that situation, it might be a little difficult. Maybe you really do need to come up with a different water source. But if, on the other hand, you were growing tomatoes, tomatoes are up off the ground, and if you were irrigating your tomato plants using drip irrigation and drip tape, then the plants and the produce, the tomatoes, would have very little chance of contact with the actual water itself. So that would be an acceptable way of working with a water source that doesn't meet the microbial standard, but still being able to grow produce with it. Or
Sarah?
Yes.
Oh, I realize this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much with FSMA. We do need to move to our next presenter.
Okay.
And I know that you have a lot of information. And again, we will provide links to some of these slides. So I hate to do this, but I do need to switch over to Ryan Pekarek at this time with Pekarek's Produce.
Okay.
Thank you so much. And Ryan, whenever you are ready.
Okay, I think I'm on now, I guess. My name's Ryan Pekarek. I run Pekarek's Produce. We are about 12 miles north of Seward, Nebraska, in Butler County. This year we have about 13 acres of vegetables outside. We have one heated greenhouse that we use for transplant production to go to the field and do some tomato and cucumbers in there. And we have 5 unheated high tunnels that we use throughout the season. But we're primarily outdoors is where most of our vegetables are coming from. This kind of background information. Where we sell from, I think our markets we kind of break down into thirds. We do about 1/3 through farmers markets at the Haymarket and in Seward, Nebraska. We do about 1/3 through CSA, our own, and tomato up in Omaha, Multi-Farm CSA. And then the last third comes from what I call the wholesale, which we do through the university We do some grocery store sales, and then the schools I include in this. I put a list up just of some of the schools that we've sold to in the past. We've tried with some other places, and maybe because we haven't been able to see eye to eye or else staff changes, that seems to be a kind of one issue every once in a while. Our local school, and my kids go, we live in the district of East Butler, which is in Brainerd and Dwight. We've been delivering to them about 4 years. We usually do twice a week in the fall, Tuesday and Thursday. And we kind of, over the last couple of years, Kathy knows what we're going to have. I kind of know what she's going to order. And that's worked fairly well for us. It's about 12 miles from home. It's an easy little jog in the morning. In the past, we went to Aquinas and St. Mary's, which was a Catholic school in David City. And that's one where I mentioned we lost a food service director. And anyone that's farming knows there's only so many hours in the week, and sometimes you hit a little obstacle like that, and you go, well, we're going to go someplace else, or we'll just let something fall by the wayside. For 2015, after going to some of these meetings with Center for Rural Affairs and some other meetings where they promote the farm to school stuff, I decided we're going right to the top on this stuff. So we put out a formal bid with OPS, which is Omaha Public School. And then we kind of did an informal, what I call spot buying, where we just talk on the phone with Lincoln Public Schools. Both of those have their perks. The LPS has kind of been a nice surprise. If we're long on something, I can talk to them, and she can help us kind of clean out the cooler every once in a while. With OPS, we went through a formal contract, which we did in, I believe it was in January. We had to submit a contract. Lots of legalese and stuff, and then you get to the last 2 pages is the crops you're going to have for them, and the quantity and the price. And earlier it was mentioned farmers speak a different language than food service providers, and I've dealt with that. They want to buy things in a 3-pound bag or a 10-pound case, and I think in terms of hundreds of pounds or heads of broccoli or a bin of something. So you kind of have to figure out how, to a certain extent, the farmer has to kind of cheat to the wholesale standards or work towards the standards that the schools are working with. It makes it easier for them, I think. The crops we've dealt with the schools, I have a laundry list. I'll just kind of run through some of them where I think the schools are using them. Tomatoes is showing up on hamburgers or nachos, sandwiches, stuff like that. Bell pepper and snack pepper, zucchini, yellow squash is cut up and just put on something like a veggie bar. We've seen some schools that are using cauliflower and broccoli. They're cooking with it, doing like a steamed broccoli or steamed cauliflower, something a little more than just a salad bar. Some of the last stuff is kind of smaller scale, but kohlrabi, radishes. We even have one school where East Butler's buying turnips, and the kids are eating turnips, and it's blown everybody's mind, myself included. But the kids are eating turnips, and they like them. They're eating them every week. It's a small volume item, but as long as you're going there, I think we should haul as much there as we can. The last 2, I think there'd be a lot more potential for, but the bulk and the volume becomes the problem. Watermelons and muskmelon. Kids love watermelons. They'll eat muskmelon not as much as watermelon. But how do you get watermelons to a school like OPS or something like that? They have 41 locations. LPS has 56 locations. And if they need a couple of watermelons at each location, that becomes your major obstacle. So I think there's some potential there on those 2 crops. East Butler, the small schools, they'll buy 6, 8, 10 at a time, or they'll do maybe watermelon once a week and muskmelon once a week. It works pretty well, but when you get to the bigger schools, you need something that goes in a box and goes on a pallet, something that's easier to handle. Most of the obstacles we've run into this are between people's ears. I talked with and most of the obstacles for farmers are between our ears too. That's not just on the school side of it, that's both sides. I called one school one time to talk that I heard about at the meeting. They were buying produce, and the person I was talking to was sure that it was illegal for me to come there and deliver food to the school and buy it. and she thought there was no way that that could be legal and insurable and everything else. And I said, well, then, okay, thanks for your time, and that was the end of that, and you just go on to somebody else. And you'll find the people either through support from the parents or support from the staff. You'll find the place that's a fit for you, and you'll kind of know it when you get there, when you meet those folks. Quantity is not really an obstacle. If you're I put it up there because if you're a small farm, there's only so many hours in the day. You're already going to the markets and everything else, and then all of a sudden you commit to 10 pounds of something for a school or 1,000 pounds of something. And I don't always do a good job doing that. I think, well, it's easy to plant 2 rows of tomatoes, and we're going to pick 1,000 pounds a week. And then you run into, well, where are we going to put this? Where are we going to pack this? How are we going to deliver this? Does it all fit on the truck? It'll vary. Tomatoes for us will run anywhere from 10 pounds a couple times a week at East Butler to 1,400 pounds at a delivery for the Lincoln Public Schools. And I think they both have their fit, and there's a good place for both. Payment, we run basically whatever the terms are for the district I've agreed to, because there's no reason when they have 10, 20, or 100 vendors that I should try and come in and reinvent the wheel. One school pays us every 2 weeks, and we have 1 or 2 then that pay once a month. One of them's after a school board meeting when they can approve the bills, and then the other one is they pay on a calendar month. So whatever we deliver in the month of September, that check comes in early October. There we go. If you can get the right people put together, I think it can work. Either the food service folks, maybe the administration is pushing them, or the parents or someone like that. The schools that we've gone to, I've either met them at meetings or else we've approached them ourselves. I think it can be very successful. We don't do anything specifically for a school or anything. It's just we have our mix of crops, and we've been able to kind of blend in the school sales as part of everything else we're doing. I talk with most of the, I say gals, but I talk with the gals that are buying either at delivery, or I'll email on Thursday or Friday, hey, I think we're going to have 5 cases of this, 40 cases of this. And then on Monday or Tuesday when they look at their menu, they'll say, okay, we need 10 of this and 20 of that, and then you have to kind of meet in the middle somewhere and make it work. I think the availability works fairly well. The problem is we think of our garden season or our farming season, we kind of think June, July, August, and really with the schools, by the time they get going, you're looking at maybe late August, and then September, October, November. Spring is really hard for us. I need to be in the field working. Even with the tunnels, I'd rather be focused in the tunnels in the spring for farmers market season to get people to remember that we're out there, and then in the fall is where I look for the school sales. So we will drop off. Most of our sales are September and October. We'll run some cool season stuff into November, and we'll be shut down basically by Thanksgiving. Anything after that I just consider a good bonus. The weather will beat you up. This year we're going to be out of the field a month early. We typically would have some of our cool season stuff into November, and this year into November Thanksgiving season, and this year we're going to be done early. We'll make it to Halloween and a little after, and we'll be done. The last point, I think if you get it going, it can be kind of consistent. You know those guys are there all the time. You're not going to have problems with the school district paying for it or anything like that if you can meet them on price. And it's nice to come home with an empty truck. So. That's all I have, I guess, for my presentation, if anybody has a question or anything.
Ryan, thank you so much for telling your story and sharing your successes and challenges with Farm to School. I'm waiting for some questions to come in, and so feel free to type those in the question box towards the bottom of your panel. And while we're waiting on that, did just want to draw your attention. We have one more webinar. We had our first webinar for food service directors and staff last week, and you can find that on our website. You'll find the link to it there. You can also find it on our YouTube channel. Our next webinar will be Wednesday, November 11th for farmers and ranchers to learn an easier way to make the school connection, where we'll have presenters from Lone Tree Foods, a school that has used the Nebraska Food Co-op, and Don Price with Price Farms out of Lyons, Nebraska. And then lastly, if you have any questions that arise for you, I don't see any coming in now, so if you have any questions that arise for you after this webinar, or after you've logged off and get to thinking about it a little bit more, feel free to reach out to Sarah Smith, our Nebraska Farm to School lead. You may email her, phone her. You can also connect with us on the Center for Rural Affairs website by going to cfra.org/farm-to-school. Find us on Facebook at Nebraska Farm to School. And you can also connect with the center and with Nebraska Farm to School through Twitter at CFRA, and find us on Instagram at Rural Nerd. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today, and thank you all for attending and learning more about these resources.